Welcome to another episode of Four Guys Talking About AI. Today we got three guys. We got John, Greg, and myself. Hey guys, how's it going?
Good. How's it going, Ray?
Doing great, doing great. Big week this week in the world of AI. Today's episode starts with a quiet move that might end up being one of the biggest AI signals of the year. OpenAI just hired the founder of OpenClaw. OpenClaw has been this viral open source project that lets you run your own autonomous agents locally. So huge advancement. We'll get into what that all means. But it's not a talent hire. It's a roadmap for OpenAI and for other companies where the shift is no longer from search to chat. It's from chat to actually having AI doing the work for you and agents doing the work for you. This is a big leap. It's a big change from, where AI becomes the interface and operates software on your behalf, which has implications to be able to upend the entire SaaS model, where you don't log into tools, the model just talks to them. And this is why the Databricks CEO says that SaaS isn't dead, but it's becoming irrelevant, or it's becoming invisible to the UI layer. And then there's a human impact of all of this. Harvard Business Review said that AI doesn't reduce work, it actually intensifies it. And John made this analogy where the exoskeleton makes you stronger. Similarly, AI can be that exoskeleton. So instead of it being a replacement of people, it helps you do the heavy lifting a little bit more like an exoskeleton would. So let's jump into some of these stories here. Let's talk about OpenClaw, because this story just took the world by storm over the past 6 weeks or so. It was really just a short kind of period, but it signals the move from co-pilots to operators and from tools that you use to systems that run workflows for you. John, I know you've been messing around with creating your own chatbots and your own kind of agents and your agent force. Talk about why this is so significant and what's going on in the market right now with this.
Yeah, it's a really big deal, and that's evidenced by the market reception and it's how it's kind of impacted a whole bunch of little corners of the market. So the gist here is that OpenClaw is this open source project that allows you to create your own personal assistant on your computer. So it does live locally. That's connected to all of your systems and all of your services and everything you do. So it can kind of see in a very easy way everything that you're up to. And as a result of that, you can ask it to do all kinds of arbitrary things, and it does it just the way that an assistant might do it. So you can say, hey, check my email every hour, look for important emails that look urgent, and then let me know when you see those. And actually go ahead and draft a response to those for me, and I'll check the response draft and choose which ones I want to send. And if it's something that can wait till tomorrow, put it in my task list and give it a priority of 1. So that kind of interaction with the agent is possible. If we zoom out for a second, what's really happened is this guy, this developer, a single developer working on this project, essentially scooped everybody. This is what Apple Intelligence was supposed to be. This is what Apple had on the main stage with their iOS release announcing Apple Intelligence. It was this, bot that's aware of everything that you're doing on your device, interconnected with all the things that you use, and able to take actions on your behalf. So basically, this guy has pulled it off. Without kind of going into other details, this caused Mac Minis to go out of stock, because people were out buying them up to run this tool on them. Overnight, within maybe 4 or 5 days of this starting to explode, 6 different OpenClaw hosting companies sprung up, and their revenue lines look like this, hosting this stuff. This, I think, is the fastest GitHub project to go to 100,000 stars in the history of GitHub. And the battle lines are starting to be drawn here with the other players. The initial setup of OpenClaw leveraged a terms of service violation in Claude's Pro Max program. Anthropic is fighting back hard on that. And meanwhile, OpenAI went ahead and hired the guy who built it all. So it's really been an extraordinary, sort of a storm, a tsunami in the last few weeks here.
I mean, you look at other companies like Manus or GenSpark and others that have created a much safer kind of way to be able to implement this, right? So a lot of security risks that are part of OpenClaw in general, right? You start to connect all of these different services to it, but it's pretty wild west and early days right now with a lot of that. And there are these libraries that you can add, these skills that you can add to it that are open source or off the shelf. But a lot of them can have Trojan horses in there, or other backdoor ways to be able to steal data or get access to passwords and whatever. That also comes with this whole new environment. And that's the big risk with OpenClaw as it is. And so there's a lot of people who say when you install it, make sure that you install it in a vacuum so it's not just connected to all of your systems and services, just freely, because you can really put yourself at risk. Whereas you have other companies like Manus or GenSpark and others, and very quickly these other services are going to start to pop up, because this did kick the door open, and those services are offering a much more safe kind of way to be able to implement these agents and this kind of agent task force to do these tasks for you. So it's a really interesting kind of movement that's happening here.
This is a kind of a metaphor for the accelerated development of AI in general, right? I mean, just the way in which everything is kind of picking up steam and momentum. I saw a post earlier this week that was sort of promoting the idea that small businesses who could tap into the whole MCP infrastructure, or agentic infrastructure, are just not going to pay for SaaS. Why would you do that? All these kludgy SaaS tools out there, with their difficult interfaces and their weird configurations, it'll just be much more intuitive. You'll be able to tap into all kinds of different capabilities at will. And, essentially the AI kind of alternative takes over. And there was a financial company. It shows Intuit and several other Gusto and several other software SaaS tools, and then it has itself as the alternative. See, this is not good branding because I can't remember the brand, but the pitch is essentially right. We'll replace all these multiple SaaS tools that don't interact or don't interoperate, that cost a lot of money, that are difficult to use, that require a lot of time to set them up, and so on and so forth, and are brittle, with this one all-in-one tool that's intuitive and easy to use. That's a very compelling pitch. But I think what you're describing about the sort of there's a technical level of proficiency that's required to engage right now with MCP and with agentic tools that does not exist out in the mainstream, or does not exist among most small businesses. And I think that's
Yeah.
an interesting juxtaposition.
This is very early days. So this is reminiscent a little bit of, back in the early days of the internet when, you just read web pages and it was just sort of like you couldn't publish to the web. And then, my old company, Zoom.com, and there were other companies, Tripod and GeoCities and other companies like that made it so that you could easily publish to the web without knowing HTML. And I think if you take a page out of that playbook and you go, okay, where we are with this right now, to your point, Greg, is that you need a lot of technical proficiency to get your head around installing OpenClaw, making it work. Even if you watch some videos on YouTube, it's still pretty technical. And you got into the terminal layer, terminal app, and start doing all this stuff. Most people don't even know what they're doing in that environment. That all is going to get leapfrogged very quickly, and is starting to already. Like Manus already has capability to do this, where you don't even need to know any of that stuff. It just works, and you connect it with Telegram simply by scanning a QR code and then connecting Telegram to it. And now you can just talk to Telegram and tell it what to do, and it'll start doing things. And let's also not forget that Meta just bought Manus, not too long ago. So, the race is on really with these, behemoth players. And as this category starts to open up, the bigger, broader opportunity, or sort of like what's coming in this space, is less about going to a chatbot and asking it, something that you might ask in Google and search, and it's more so about creating agents where you have a master agent that is sort of like the boss, the CEO of those things, and then you have sub agents that are specialists in these different areas that do those tasks. So, like an example might be you have like a chief marketing officer. Marketing is your goal. You can have a chief marketing officer agent that's your master agent. And then you have a researcher and a content writer and a video creator and then a publisher. And then you have an editor, and you have all these different agents that specialize in all these different things. And they coordinate together to work as a team to do a variety of those marketing tasks. That's an example of how, this environment is going to start to evolve.
I would add to this. I mean, I think the interesting thing that's evolving, and Greg, this goes to some of the stuff you were talking about in terms of the impact on SaaS. We don't really need to, buy and deploy if we're individuals or small businesses. We don't need to buy and deploy products. We can actually deploy patterns, and what I mean by that is, I'll give you an example from something that came out this last week. So this woman who's a mom and a businesswoman as well was playing around with OpenClaw and was able to set it up so that it went to her Instacart account and checked her historical buying patterns over the last 3 months, looked at the upcoming calendar for when she was going to be home and when she wasn't, and built a shopping cart for her that had, the family's typical meals in it, plus took into account what was happening that week. And then she just was able to go in and say, oh yeah, this looks good. Move this, and hit go, and it orders, right? So that's not actually a product, and you probably couldn't get away with building a product to do that. That's a pattern, which is build my shopping cart with context around who I am, what I care about, and what's coming up for me, leveraging a whole bunch of, what could be arbitrary systems that I use. It doesn't matter if that's in Google Calendar, in Microsoft Office 365, or in a Notepad text document. The interesting thing about these tools is that they can apply the pattern to any system. And the same is true on the small business side, right? So like, it doesn't really matter what POS I'm using. It doesn't really matter what my e-com site is. You can take a pattern, which is like, hey, the customer has a complaint, and do something with it, intelligent, that takes into account all of the context of my business and my needs, and that kind of thing. And that is truly disruptive and wild.
Two things are interesting about what you're saying. One is, the brand that I couldn't remember was Collective, and they want to replace TurboTax, LegalZoom, QuickBooks, and Gusto with the one product. So that's one model where I have a AI-based product that substitutes for existing tools and systems that I'm using. What you're describing is, I've got a bunch of relationships with SaaS tools, and I'm going to use this AI layer, however we want to characterize it, and it's going to execute a lot of things for me and make my life simpler. And those are two distinct things, even though the underlying capabilities may be similar. And what's interesting to me about the second scenario, where, the Instacart example that you gave, which I think everybody wants simplification, right? Time savings and simplification. The interesting thing there, from my point of view, is that everything underneath that AI agent experience is commoditized.
Yes.
And then it becomes, to some degree, it's about features, but it's also about price. So, everything just becomes a commodity. The brand falls away. It becomes very hard for those companies to differentiate, because if they're doing more or less the same thing, I'm going to go with the cheapest one. Maybe security is an issue. There's some other considerations, but everything is commoditized. And that's, I don't want to digress into this too much, but there's a similar risk or phenomenon that happens on the consumer side, where AI is the interface, all the information behind it, whatever it is, products, reviews, knowledge, just becomes accessible through the AI interface, and it's all commoditized. And the individual places where that information is coming from are all just sources and inputs into that,
100%. That's a brilliant point. And I think what that sort of ends up meaning is you've got this AI intermediation layer, right? It actually changes the switching costs of those end tools, right? So
Yeah.
because I'm now interacting with the AI layer, it doesn't really matter what's on the other side of it. And by the way, I think that ends up being the big threat to the SaaS businesses, and even the sort of small individual things like my to-do list or my Google Calendar or whatever. Like if all of a sudden I can keep my interface to all that stuff the same, but swap out the back end for something less expensive, in 10 minutes, like that's extremely disruptive. I mean, even like you're saying, like in the Instacart example, like that same exact pattern could be applied to order directly from Vaughn's through their store.
Yeah.
I don't use Instacart anymore. So like the switching cost of the underlying tools that we're linking to all of a sudden goes, approaches zero.
We're using consumer examples here with Instacart and Vaughn's, but on the B2B side of things, just in the past month, there's been a $400 billion enterprise value that's been wiped out in just the past month for these reasons, right? You've got HubSpot that's down 48 to 51%. You got
It's a
Service.
bunch of companies.
Bunch of companies. ServiceNow is down 30%. So the SaaS industry in and of itself is getting crushed for a lot of these reasons. And what's happening is that, like we're saying, is that there's an abstraction layer with AI where the shift is that not so much that the SaaS itself disappears, but instead of humans being the primary user of it, the AI will become the user of it, or these agents will become the user of it, right?
Yeah,
So
which sort of suggests like that these infrastructure tools that are agent that you can enable via agents end up being really important. Like Stripe seems like an even more brilliant a tool or company than it already is, right? So because my AI agent is not going to build a payment network. Like it's not going to build an alternative to Visa and invite a bunch of people to it. Programmatic access to that, my AI agent absolutely could and should and will utilize, and Stripe has built that. So any of these programmatic infrastructure layers end up being really, really interesting, and especially those that tap into existing networks, payment networks, the internet itself, email, other of the sort of, protocol driven infrastructure elements like that. That stuff probably, is very insulated and actually gets more valuable as all this other stuff is getting disrupted.
Yeah. So it's moving from this concept of system of record to system of agent calls, right? Salesforce, HubSpot, ServiceNow, Workday, they don't necessarily vanish, they don't disappear, but they become databases or permission layers and workflow engines and APIs. And the SaaS becomes the infrastructure for the agents, right? That's the big shift.
I'll give you a really funny example from this week about exactly this, right? So I had set up HubSpot for a project that I'm working on to use their free tier to just be a basic CRM. And it's gotten far enough along where I wanted to do some actual reports. And I go in there to do the reports and it's like, oh, you have to upgrade. And now it's $45 a seat and all that stuff, right? Well, in about 45 minutes, I had all the reports that I wanted built separately by just using the API key from HubSpot and setting an agent loose saying like, here's my report specs, go build this. So, is that disruptive to HubSpot's, pricing model? I think it probably is. Now, I was probably not a candidate to pay $45 a seat anyway. I just wasn't going to do it. But wow, was that an eye-opening experience.
Well, you're kind of like, asking the question, why am I paying per human when the work is done per agent?
Yeah, that's right.
Like why, so that really does upend their model quite a bit. And, now you have the new stack is you've got the user to the UI to the SaaS to the database. That's been the old stack rather. The new stack is the user to the AI agent to the SaaS tools. And so, the companies that win in this world are those who expose deep APIs, they enable automation, they price on consumption or outcome or rate limiting, kind of things, as opposed to per seat or per human, kind of a model. And this is going to be a huge shift in the SaaS, kind of world.
2 points. One is, in the battle between AI startups and established SaaS companies, there was the brand, the existing customer relationship, and some level of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And, there was always this question of go to market for the smaller companies. I'm a no-name brand. People can't necessarily have confidence that I'm going to remain around. There were all these sort of questions. But this scenario that we're describing, that you guys are talking about, redresses some of that imbalance because, back to the commodity thing, um, I don't have to worry about. I mean, I might have to worry about the longevity or the stability of a company, but really, I'm just looking for the best cost, or I'm just looking for something that meets my needs. And this is a go-to-market for small companies. I mean, by the same token, they can't really establish brands. The other thing that I think about is support. So, what happens if I've got some problem with the underlying functionality, HubSpot, Instacart, whatever it is, right? Some marketing tool. I don't have I mean, I have a relationship with that company, but where does the support come from? Are these SaaS companies gonna pull back on their willingness to deliver support because they no longer have a direct there's a kind of a re weakening of the customer relationship? What's gonna happen there? Who's gonna provide that support?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And I think what happens is that there are companies that will continue to just be SaaS companies that will allow you to access their data in a little bit of a different way, and use the agents and rate limit and price on consumption, where you kind of, roll your own, you create your own solution, and you go in that direction. Then there are going to be other companies that are more of like the service part of a SaaS business, where they really lean in to provide for true customer success, like a coach, an advisor, somebody who can help you along the way make sense of this. Because a lot of this stuff is beyond, it's technically beyond what people are accustomed to, and a lot of this is going to need handrails and somebody to guide them through that process. And for those companies that lean into that, they're going to build better relationships with their customers, provide more value, provide a couple coaching, with that kind of a customer engagement, build trust, all these kinds of things. It'd be a little bit more expensive as a service to be able to offer that, because you're paying for people to do this. And maybe, down the road, there will be a blend of people and AI video, or, sort of inline video that shows, here's how you use these things, or maybe some chatbots along the way that can ask questions that provide better customer service in that moment. So there will be a hybrid of that kind of a thing. But I think you're going to see a lot of companies leaning in to providing this handrail approach.
Well, I mean, one of the things that has happened is that, you've got people who are selling AI customer service solutions out there, and the actual experience of customer service is not getting better. I mean, maybe you guys can pull up examples, but it's very hard for me to find that. I have one example, but it's very hard for me to find that in the sort of fragmented customer service environment that we're in now. Phone support, which is also challenging sometimes. But I think service and support become true differentiators in a world where everything is automated and everything is abstracted, and it's harder and harder to get to people.
Yeah.
And you see it in the airlines where, or in, I've got a SurveyMonkey account, and if you want to get phone support, you got to pay more money. But the airlines, like, if I'm a United frequent flyer, so if you're a 1K customer or above global services, they'll pick up that phone on one ring. It's a US based person, no delay, great service. And the further down the status hierarchy you go, the more automated, the more abstract, the more delayed it becomes. And that's probably something that we'll see here. But in a world of commoditized software, service is really one of the few, if not the only differentiators.
Yeah, I mean, this goes to, we've talked about this a little bit before, but one of the possible, utopian futures is that the software eats the world, AI eats software. That's kind of the framing, and then that causes the cost of all this stuff to go down dramatically. And in that world, there's a premium on true human stuff. And what you're describing is true human stuff, like actual service from an actual human, becomes the value differentiator, and more broadly in that sort of utopian vision, if you buy into it at all, it's like artisanal stuff. And by the way, it's also live stuff. It's concerts, it's being around other people.
It's human experiences.
And
this goes back to, this is one of the very first episodes that we had where we talked about this kind of stuff, where we were saying, in this world of AI and automation and the slop that comes with all of that, that there becomes a premium on the human experience, and whether like you're saying, John, like at the artisanal level or live event level, or just even connecting with people. I know that just speaking with my daughter and a lot of her friends at their age, they reject a lot of the AI stuff. They're actively rejecting it and saying that it's really more about the human experiences, and it's a very interesting thing to see at that generational level, and having the opinions be so strong. I think it's telling what's to come here.
My younger daughter, who's in college, I have an older daughter who works at Databricks, and my younger daughter is a junior studying biology, basically. And she talks to me about, don't use AI because you're using a lot of water, you're using a lot of power, and she's thinking about the environmental impact of AI. And she uses it periodically, selectively for things, but she's preaching something very similar to what you're describing, Andy, that there's a much more reflective and conscious attitude here, and a sense that technology, we grew up at a time, I think, or came of age professionally at a time when technology was this mostly positive impact on the world. Everything is cool. Look what you can do. Look at how it's making things better, faster, more convenient, more transparent. And I think Gen Z and below see technology in a very different way, and generally have a much more skeptical and kind of sense of it as an ominous force in our society.
Yeah. And as well,
it's fascinating when you couple it with, I read a stat last week saying that due to social media and technology, that teens are interacting with each other 50% less as well. So, is it anti-social media or what is it? But the idea is that when you couple that kind of an outcome and their daily life, that happens with technology, and then you have this kind of like concept where AI is, people just become so reliant on it that their brains turn to mush a little bit at that age, when really it's such a coming of age, it's such an important time for their brains to actually grow and expand and learn, which is true at any age, I suppose, but especially at that age, I can see why there's a real pushback on that. Which leads to this other kind of concept that we were talking about, which is about this kind of concept about the exoskeleton, right? So, in the same way that the exoskeleton can help you do heavy lifting, AI can help you do the heavy lifting. It doesn't necessarily replace the work or what you do. John, we were talking about that before we started the episode. You wanna dig?
Yeah, and I wish I could claim credit for the metaphor, but it was in an interesting blog post by somebody who made this distinction between AI as exoskeleton versus AI as coworker, and it's subtle, but I think really important. So what he was referring to, I think, directly is like the exosuit kind of phenomenon, where like, for instance, you have in a warehouse, somebody can kind of put on the robotic, augment suit that gives you more strength, so you can lift the heavy boxes and whatever else you might need to do. So that, that suit is not autonomous. It doesn't decide which box to move or even really move itself around the warehouse and find the thing. It's actually empowering a human to do sort of superhuman stuff. And so, the coworker there would be like, a robot you tell to go do this thing and monitor it. The exosuit kind of a metaphor is I strap it on and now I can do a lot more than I could do before. And I think critically with that, there's two pieces that matter. One of them is it's only going to do as well as I am capable of instructing it or guiding it to do myself, right? So Andy, you and I talked about this a little bit last week with building products. Like if you're not a systems thinker, you don't know how products work, it's going to be really hard to build a sophisticated product in AI. AI doesn't cover that part. Like you need to bring to the table that understanding of systems and system patterns and interaction and whatever. And if you do that, this thing is an exosuit, that enables you to build it in, 100th the time it might take you, to do it the old-fashioned way. But without that, it's not going to be very functional. So that's one piece of it. The second important thing is I think you're still doing work, and this I think is another theme that comes up a lot. Like, is that you don't just sit back and watch the AI do its thing and like, I don't have any work anymore. In some regards, I have found it to be more cognitively demanding, because I am monitoring multiple streams and threads, trying to sort of solve the puzzle with the AI's help, making decisions, redirecting when it runs into issues. I'm running around the warehouse all day, even though it's helping me lift things, I'm still moving a lot. So, so those are two elements where I think this metaphor is really, really compelling.
When you extrapolate that out, and kind of the challenging part of that is when you have a team of agents that are self-operating, and one of those agents is the optimizer agent that isn't necessarily telling you what it's doing, right? That's now you're sort of like out of the exoskeleton. Now it's sort of like its own animal and doing its own thing. And that is what I think is so revolutionary about this OpenClaw kind of environment, or whatever this new agentic, kind of phase that we're going to be heading into is really all about. It's a big shift from, going to a chatbot, asking it questions, it gives you answers, ask it again, it gives you a little bit more answers. That's completely different than creating these agents and team of agents that are like a swarm, and they can just do a number of things really without you. I mean, they don't need your input. And if you train it to do it that way, it can just present information to you throughout the day or the next morning, and, provide you with insights to, look at your calendar and tell you like, well, here's who you're meeting with, and here's a little bit more about them, and, ways that you might be able to guide those conversations and get more value from those meetings. But that's just an example. There are so many of these examples of it running automatically on its own.
The thing that was interesting to me about this distinction between the coworker metaphor and the exoskeleton metaphor, as we were talking before we started recording, is what's at stake in picking the right metaphor. Why do we care about the metaphor? What's important about how we think about it metaphorically, or how we characterize it? I mean, I think that's a sort of an academic question, but it's also not an academic question, because it frames the way, CEOs and people in positions of hiring might think about the utility of this, or how they have to think about their labor force.
Yeah, I mean, this is all new stuff, so you have to kind of like put it somewhere. And what's it analogous to? And how do I actually think about this stuff? Are these agents now employees of mine? Is that like, should I be thinking about it like that? Or are they just assistants, or what really are they?
Well, that's the IT is the new HR stuff that was going around a few months ago.
Yeah. And I think what you're pointing out is the mental model is really important, like how we think about it. And because, what's at stake here is, are humans replaceable or not? And and in what functions are they replaceable, and in what functions are they not, right? So that's the thing that is the big question, and because that informs policy and what we think about in terms of worker retraining. It informs hiring and firing decisions if you're running a company. It informs what I learn next if I'm a human who wants to make myself a little bit resilient in the face of AI oversight. Like, newsflash, don't become a taxi driver, or a long haul truck driver for that matter. Probably not a radiologist. Is it safe for me to become a programmer? Probably not, unless I'm actually a product specialized programmer. And thinking about this mental model is kind of what I think helps you to sort out some of the paths there. So I think that's critical.
And the reason narrative is really there's a premium on being the storyteller in this moment, right? Being able to tell the story of whatever it is that that you want to build, or whatever it is that you're building, and being able to tell the story around that. And there's a premium on these kind of storyteller roles at the moment in this current environment. But what's also interesting about this whole argument about will AI replace jobs and all of this, if you consider the source a little bit, you've got all of the CEOs of these AI companies saying, yeah, it's going to replace jobs. Like, we're, get ready because here it comes. Well, they're selling. That's them selling a little bit also. They're making these massive investments, and they have to show their shareholders a return on investment. What's their return on investment? Is that it becomes the new HR, replaces people in these things, which is a little bit of a conundrum, because if it's replacing people and people don't have jobs and then they don't have money, how are they going to afford all this stuff anyway? So what's the incentive to really replace people? So there is that on the one hand. On the other hand, you have people are dynamic. They have ideas. AI doesn't necessarily have ideas. It's not going to necessarily come up with something creative and unique and different. It doesn't necessarily have domain expertise in a way that you can apply it to something new in certain industries. Some industries are rote and they're just like formulaic, and in those kinds of industries, like the ones that you just mentioned, John, that those will get disrupted. But there are these dynamics that are at play, and so you really do have to kind of consider the source of who's telling you these things and what's their motivation for telling you those things.
There's a kind of short-term, long-term thing going on here. A lot of public companies have an incentive to shed headcount. Their investors are rewarding them for reducing costs. Institutional investors are very sensitive to costs, and they're always looking at your cost structure and spending. And so some of these companies have been rewarded when they've done layoffs, saying, "Oh, I don't need as many headcounts, so I'm, because AI is capable of doing these roles." There's a short-term benefit to many of these companies that the market is rewarding in some cases. In the long term, the holistic impact on the society, on spending, on the economy, is largely negative, unless you buy into some of the fantasies of some of these broligarchs who are saying, everything is going to be utopian and costs are going to come down, and people will, like in some, I think of what's the H.G. Wells story, The Time Machine, where, they go into a world where the troglodytes are eating the people that are just sitting around doing nothing and having leisure, and their brains have atrophied. Unless you sort of buy into those fantasies, the long-term consequences of all this, in one view, are pretty dire. And we need to find some sort of middle ground, recognizing that structurally things are going to change in the economy, but not saying that we can't do anything about it and that we can't prepare for it. I mean, I know I recommended that we not get into this, but it's sort of unavoidable in a certain way. But
Well, there's a side effect of all of this too, that if you think about it from an investment and the stock market and that kind of perspective, so much of what drives the stock market is the jobs, the job numbers, right? So if you combine, all this massive job loss that happens, and very quickly what happens in reaction of that is that then you have the stock market that just tanks, because now you just have the unemployment numbers that are gone wild. And while that's happening, and we're seeing that kind of thing, uh, uh, I mean, that's an impact that I think that there's a lot of money at risk right now should that happen. And I don't know.
Nobody would be happy about that. Nobody would be happy
Consider the
about that.
source of when when you're hearing that it's going to replace all the jobs. Stupid out.
There's a lot more to talk about, and this is an ongoing topic of conversation. So, we'll have many more conversations about this. But it's all interesting, right? I mean, if you take a step back and you don't worry about your own particular future, it's very interesting. I mean, we're at a time of dramatic transition in the society in a lot of respects.
Big time. So, well, good. It's great conversation, guys. Thanks everybody for listening today. Appreciate it. We'll be back next week with more. And don't forget to like and subscribe and share and all those good things. And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.